This is Cast of Wonders, the young adult fiction podcast featuring stories of the fantastic. Welcome, episode 626. I'm Becca Miles, Associate Editor at Cast of Wonders, and your host for today's episode. I started writing to procrastinate from a biology degree, and accidentally procrastinated my way into a career. I've had poems published in various places, and one day I might be brave enough to submit some of my short stories too. I live in Nottinghamshire in the UK with my wonderful partner and an elderly lizard called Gizmo. Every year, Cast of Wonders highlights some of our favourite episodes from the previous year. It's a great chance for us to take a bit of a breather and to let you, our listeners, catch up on any missed back episodes with new commentary from a different member of the crew. Our story for today is Bokrug and the Boy by Liam Hogan, which was first published by the Dragon's Roost Press in December 2022. And reprinted as Cast of Wonders 601 in August 2024. Liam Hogan is an award-winning short story writer with stories in Best of British Science Fiction and in Best of British Fantasy, Newcon Press. He volunteers at creative writing charities Ministry of Stories and Spark Young Writers. Host of the live literary event Liars League London for 12 years, he's now escaped to Shropshire but remains a liar. More details at happyendingnotguaranteed.blogspot.co.uk. This story is narrated by Matt Dovey. Matt Dovey is very tall, very British, and most likely drinking a cup of tea right now. A village elder once told him the scar on his arm marked him for greatness, but he's not so sure. He now lives in a quiet market town in rural England with his wife and 3 children, and still struggles to express his delight in this wonderful arrangement. Although his surname rhymes with Dopey, any other similarities to the dwarf are coincidental. He has fiction out and forthcoming all over the place. Keep up with it at mattdovey.com or find him time-wasting on social media as @MattDoveyWriter. Content warning for bullying and implied neglect. And now we've a tale to tell.
Bokrug and the Boy by Liam Hogan. Read by Matt Dovey.
You know we don't care.
Yes, you've said. It wasn't much of a beach. Estuary mud, littered with debris from both river and sea. A hulking concrete sewage outlet that only discharged at the minimum recommended distance from land when measured at high tide. Betwixt and between neither ocean nor shore, even the seabirds avoided the area, as Samuel Peltsy trudged through the boot-sucking sludge, half-heartedly poking a stick. No more than a giant step behind, the great Old One lurked. Against the grey sky, reflected by the grey sea. Or was it the other way around? Foregrounded by grey mud. The eldritch horror's powerful limbs and webbed feet were better suited to the conditions than an 8-year-old's short legs and hand-me-down, but still oversized Wellingtons, one of which had long ago sprung a leak that cracked and weathered seals not up to the pull of the thick mud, rank water oozing in with every second step and soaking his doubled-up socks. His jeans were turning the same dismal grey, caked layer that would only flake off when next he went to put them on, there being little point in being washed until the holiday was over. The horror, which went by the name of Bokrug, but not to many, not in these unenlightened times, had first observed this dirty straw-haired youngster as he'd stood, hands in tight fists, backed up against the rough, slime-covered sewage outlet, facing down a motley crew of older local kids. Something in Samuel's stance, in his refusal to cry and run away as the taunts and handfuls of mud flew in, had snagged the water god's attention. Finally, the gang had tired of their sport, perhaps assuming their victim was mentally incapable of the response they sought. And so they'd wandered off, hurling the casual "loser" and "dumb kid" in their wake. The horror had taken a short step forward into the space the bullies had vacated, and the boy's wounded gaze snapped to it. "Your turn," Samuel said, with more defiance than either hate or fear. "Go on, do your worst." Bokrug's worst was very, very bad indeed. Apocalyptically bad. The total destruction, overnight, of a thriving city, of a prosperous kingdom. Bad. Only psychotic heads of cults who, deep in their soiled, shriveled hearts, believed more in themselves than in legends of river gods, ever asked Bokrug to do their worst. And the horror sometimes gave the fools the merest taste of what they were capable of, just for the remote pleasure of watching those so-called priests claw out their own eyes and other organs. But this kid?
That would mean we'd noticed you,
the horror replied, after a lengthy pause.
Would mean you were worth noticing.
The boy nodded, just the once, and then shrugged, drifting towards the waterline, following the receding tide. "I'm Samuel," he offered over his rounded shoulder.
We don't care,
the horror replied, which is why the boy didn't get to hear the horror's true name, and reality didn't shred itself around the unspeakable syllables, as those unwise priests had once done, their eyes swelling and their bodies hunched, the snap as bones broke and reformed to become frog-like, to better serve Bokrug's unfathomable will. After a while, the horror, not having anything better to do this side of this century, had slithered in the boy's footsteps, sniffing the pools of grey water that filled them. The horror's own feet were fleshy and three-pronged, ending in sharply curved talons capable of ripping through the hull of even metal boats. The pools Bokrug left behind spanned 6 or so of the boy's smaller impressions, but because they were shallow, the horror could still see where Samuel had stepped, the combined footprints even more bizarre than theirs alone. If Bokrug was careful enough, it looked like an extended arrow, the dotted shaft pointing back the way they had come. The boy didn't appear to pay Bokrug much attention as he worked his way down the gentle slope, and then up again, hours later, chased by the turn of the tide. Samuel's pockets didn't have much space for finds, but then he didn't make many. Plastic bottle tops and rusty drinks cans. These were not treasures that he could make use of, that would fill the void of time. And so on he probed, the hiss of the waves and the oh-so-soft tread of Bokrug for company. At the end of the long day, as a baleful sun touched the horizon and a chill air lifted a foul miasma into the air, Samuel had nodded from the top of the low-rise behind which sheltered a caravan park, hell on earth. "See you tomorrow," he'd said. Had it been obviously a question, had it been said in a way that could be thought presumptuous, had one of the 1,001 insults and put-downs and vile curses escaped Bokrug's rubbery lips? But Samuel hadn't even waited for a reply, trudging towards the distant lights of Sandpiper, Holiday Homes and Caravan Park. And so Bokrug had hunkered down, staring out to the darkening sea with myriad eyes, as night settled around them. "You're not my first, you know."
No.
"I've had monsters before." Bokrug tilted their head, ran a bifurcated tongue over serrated teeth, the noise like chalk on a blackboard.
We don't...
They started to repeat once more, but let the truncated phrase drift on the stiffening breeze. "They come at night," Samuel went on, ignoring the interrupted interruption, or maybe just completing it mentally on the eldritch horror's behalf. Bokrug wasn't foolish enough to dismiss such comments as merely a creature of the child's mind, of the dream realm, and even if they had, would that make them any less potent? Maybe such visions explained why the boy accepted their ominous presence, their dreadful existence, without doing all that pointless screaming and running away that those who normally stumbled across them did. "Not for a while, though," the boy added, as an afterthought.
No.
"I'm a big kid," Samuel said, from beneath Bokrug's looming shadow, the skies today a lighter shade of grey. "Can't go run into my parents' bed whenever I get scared."
I suppose not.
The boy squinted up at the monstrous form, at the jagged spines that ran along Bokrug's elongated arms and down the broad back. "I'd get into trouble if I even mentioned them. Or you." Bokrug wonders, idly, if they would be doing the boy a favour by devouring his absentee parents. Parents who sent their young kid off for the long summer day, without food or drink or even a few coins for entertainment, while they did whatever it was adult holiday makers did when kid unencumbered. It would be easily done, the horrors wide-haw unhinged so that they could swallow prey larger than they were. A whole rust-flaking static caravan at a stretch. But such direct action wasn't really Bokrug's style, unbecoming of a god. Perhaps they would wait 1,000 years instead, before destroying every one of their descendants. Revenge was a dish best served so frigid that few could even remember what their ancestors' transgression had once been. Though that probably wouldn't help the boy much, especially as their descendants included his descendants. This was why Bokrug avoided the pitiful affairs of humankind. Its complicated kind of summed them up. Still, the horror wanted to do something. Some small act, not to show that they cared, for had they not said that they did not, but just to nudge the balance of the universe an insignificant smidgen in Samuel's forlorn direction. Though, perhaps just being there was enough. The boy seemed to think so, as another day came to a close and he repeated his backward, "See you tomorrow." As dusk descended once more, Bokrug shaped the dream creatures they had glimpsed in the boy's thoughts from the estuary mud. It would take the merest breath, the slightest touch, just their will, to bring the blighted fiends to awful life. Perhaps then the boy's parents wouldn't be so ready to dismiss his nocturnal fears. Perhaps those fears, rendered in effluent, tainted mud, would do the irksome chore of punishing Mr. and Mrs. Pelzy for their contemptuous ignorance. But would they stop there? Doubtful. And even if they did, would Samuel truly be better off an orphan? The kid was lonely enough already. It was, indeed, complicated. They watched as the tide washed the creations away, wiping the slates, if not clean, then at least uniformly filthy, resetting it for tomorrow. In the distance a one-eyed lighthouse turned and blinked, slow and sorrowful, as the lights on passing container ships drifted across the horizon. Bokrug sat and watched and pondered, as high above the moon took the water back and forth. It would be fuller tomorrow. Already it glittered on the wet mud and shallows, pointing the way with its own arrow, tempting the horror to go on their way, to leave this doleful place, Samuel included, far behind. They had not, after all, made any promises. Had they? Samuel was not alone when he returned the following morning. Though nor, as Bokrug batted irritation aside, could he be truly said to be with anyone, either. It was the same group of older boys as last time, hounding his footsteps. The same torment, a little slicker perhaps, a little more personal, their edge honed by a day's absence. Once again, Samuel backed up across the mud to the concrete sewer pipe, and once again the boys followed, their prey cornered, helpless, alone. Bokrug watched, unmoved and unmoving, until the serpent-like, half-buried tail gave the tiniest twitch. For a moment, the boys stopped, sensing something they didn't understand, couldn't compute, a ripple that wasn't repeated. It didn't need to be. The mud remembered. That's what mud is, the vague persistence of the land the river that had bore it had passed through. Memories of fields, yes, but also of long-gone villages, and burial mounds, and of things much more ancient. The shapes Bokrug had formed might have been smoothed and flattened by time and tide, but the same mud lay beneath the boys' feet. That tremor was all it took to summon back Samuel's nightmare creatures, and Bokrug needed to do nothing except stand by as pustulant arms and wicked claws and tentacular tentacles reached up through the soft mud to wrap around the older boy's feet, slithering up their bony ankles and slapping against their pale calves and gripping them tight as they belatedly realised their terrible plight. Needed to do nothing at all, to let those dream realm abominations drag Samuel's tormentors down, to smother them, to tear them apart, to show them the real meaning of no. Bokrug looked over in surprise. The boy wasn't watching the plight of his foes, the green fog that swirled around their imprisoned feet, eating away at their trainers and sandals, but was staring right at Bokrug instead. "Not with my monsters, if you don't mind," Samuel said before dropping his gaze. "Let them go." And Bokrug, who hadn't been asked to do something in nearly 2,000 years, do your worst having already been discounted, and hadn't been told to do something for far, far longer, let the boys go. They're buddies and louts, but they don't deserve that, and they're not worth it. Barely worth noticing, in fact.
Are you sure?
Bokrug asked. Positive. The boys, released from the mud, made desperately for higher, firmer, safer ground, stumbling and falling as often as not in their haste. By the time they got to the low ridge overlooking the estuary, they were 6 grey golems, their limbs shaking with unquenchable fear. Just one of them stopped to glance back, whether in fear for Samuel or in fear of Samuel. It was strangely hard to tell. Bokrug's shadow darkened the mud between the waste pipe and the shore, and seemed to stretch towards the trembling watcher. The kid shuddered, mouth wide open, and stumbled on. Samuel, after a moment's pause, carefully and steadily waded through the churned-up mud, following in the gang's footsteps, picking up the loose change the boys had shed as they'd struggled to escape the unseen, but very much sensed threat. Up on the pier, adults shifted out of Bokrug and the boys' way. They'd claim, if pressed, that it was because the boys' legs and hands were covered in foul-smelling mud, which was true enough. They'd claim, if asked, that the boy was alone, which was not. They certainly wouldn't be able to explain the very large candy floss hovering in the air above the boy's more normal-sized one like a pink cloud, any more than the shop that had sold them both could explain why it only charged for the one, and how come the girl who normally operated the machine with practised apathy had been unable to stop twirling the long stick in the drum around and around until it felt like her arms were about to drop off, until the machine finally ran out of sugar. Bokrug looked out to sea. Away from the unfrequented and unpopular estuary, the view was more like you might expect a seaside town to offer. Gulls riding the wind, a few brave souls splashing in the always cold waters, even a sparkle of sunlight as the day brightened. The river god preferred lakes, placid ones, where a sudden ripple could send the right sort of dire warning. And there were other eldritch beasts of the oceans, hidden in darker depths. Even on the wooden plank suspended above the waters, Bokrug felt a little like an uninvited, unwanted guest. But they had been invited. They were, implausibly, wanted. They licked at the sugary, light-as-air confection with a tongue that could oh so easily rasp the living flesh from bone, and sighed contentedly. Bokrug could almost imagine getting used to this, and perhaps, given another 1,000 years.
The filmmaker and writer Guillermo del Toro has an abundance of marvellous quotes about monsters. One that feels appropriate for this story is this: accepting that you are a monster gives you the leeway to not behave like one. Samuel doesn't fear Bokrug because, like a lot of us who have been outsiders all our lives, he feels more kinship with them than with the human family and peers he's supposed to relate to. When you're used to the everyday, normalised monstrousness of neglect or bullying, an eldritch abomination is almost refreshing in its straightforwardness. But crucially, Samuel doesn't use the cruelty of the world as an excuse to be cruel himself. He doesn't conclude that people deserve to be treated like monsters, he decides to treat the monster as a person. It's a kindness dug out with effort from the filthy estuary mud, one that exists not out of ignorance of the ugliness in the world, but because of it. It's a hard sort of compassion to practice, and often just as hard to accept. But as long as we keep our hearts open to the kindness of our fellow outsiders, we will find ourselves, like Bokrug, implausibly wanted in our chosen communities of friendly monsters. Join us again soon. We love bringing you the best audio fiction week after week, but we can't do it without your support. Your donations pay our authors, our narrators, our servers, and our staff. Please consider supporting us with a monthly donation through either PayPal or Patreon. You can also review us on Apple Podcasts, request us on Spotify, and consider the stories we publish for award consideration. There are lots of ways you can help. Join the discussion on the EA Discord and visit us on Blue Sky at castofwonders.org. Come say hello. Cast of Wonders is brought to you by editor Catherine Inskip, assistant editor Alicia Caparasso, associate editors Rebecca Ahn, Tanya Eidelet, Amy Brennan, Cup Hakob, Becca Miles, Ray O, Samuel Poots, Emma Smales, Denise Sudell, and Rin Yi. Our editorial assistant is Amy Brennan, and our audio producer is Jeremy Carter. Cast of Wonders is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That means you can download or listen to the episode on any device you like, but you can't change it or sell it. Our theme music is Appeal to Heavens by Alexei Nov, available from Promo DJ or his Facebook page. Thank you for listening.